a bit of a kind of, I guess, a challenge. I'll put a kind of perspective from Manchester out there. So obviously I'm talking to you from Manchester, and I guess the only place to start really when we're thinking about how do we achieve a more equal country than the one we currently live in, you kind of have to start with the big news of the week and ask ourselves, how did it come to happen that 72 people could lose their lives in their own homes? How is that possible in a country like ours? How is it possible that they faced indifference really from the authorities when they tried to make complaints about things? And it's a really important question that we've got to confront ourselves with. Of course, I might put the same question, how were so many people affected by contaminated blood left in the wilderness for so many years? How were the postmasters and mistresses treated in the way that they were? How was an entire English city, Liverpool, left crying injustice in the wilderness for 20 years and nobody was listening? And then that kind of takes you kind of more broadly, the country isn't or doesn't necessarily treat all people and places equally. That's certainly been my experience throughout my political career. But it then kind of, you can see that the unjust treatment of people leads into sort of the deep inequality that we've got. We live in a country where not everybody does have the benefit of a good, safe home to go to every night. Far too many of our fellow citizens, millions in fact, are not in that position. Too many parts of our country don't have adequate functional transport so people can get around. People in parts of Greater Manchester don't have a sense of security over the basics, the food that they can give for their kids. I mean, I don't wish to sort of, it's a Friday evening and I'm not coming on here to sort of, give everybody a litany of doom, because actually perhaps we're entering a new, more hopeful era. But I think we do have to just look at where we are. I think this is a moment for true national reflection so that we can actually kind of build something better from where we've got to. And the thing that I would want to sort of say, what is the root cause of all of this? What did Steve and I conclude when we wrote our book, Head North, which chronicles our decision to leave Westminster, to take up these new devolved positions in Greater Manchester and the Liverpool City region? Why did we do that? We decided, as two people who came into politics to kind of to fight against the North-South divide, to kind of get, if you like, a fairer world for the people of the northwest of England. We concluded that we couldn't really achieve it within the current political system within which we had operated as members of Parliament, myself, for 16 years. And obviously for me, that was a journey that took me right to the cabinet. We decided together that we needed to leave and advocate for a very different way of running things, a very different political system, a very different governmental system, because all of the things that I've described to you at the start of this conversation, those injustices, the horror of Grenfell and everything around it, the depth of the North-South divide in the country, these things are not an accident. These things are a product of our political and governmental system. And I think you've got to go to that realization. The North-South divide is no accident. It's a logical product of the way the country's been run. And until you kind of really open up your eyes to that, I don't think you can kind of start to build solutions out of where we find ourselves. If you run a country by hoarding political power in one postcode, SW1A OAA, we are one of the most centralized, politically over-centralized countries in the OECD. If you have a parliament that doesn't represent all people and all places equally, and our UK Parliament doesn't do that. If you furthermore have a situation where the unelected state has unchecked power in many ways, because Parliament is not set up to hold it sufficiently to account. You then create the conditions for the injustice, the inequality, the unfairness that I've spoken about. So for me, this is, if you want a more equal country, this is the bottom line, you have to face up to root and branch reform of our political system, our parliamentary system, and of the way we run things in terms of government. So Steve and I, set that out in the book. We start with the notion of a written constitution for the UK, because if the rules are left unspoken, if they're not codified, you will always have the situation where those with the power in that part of the country, in that postcode that I just said before, will, often that power will be misused, and places outside in the regions, local authorities will always have to go on bended knee to that place to try and fight for something, or always forced to bid for the things they need, when in fact it shouldn't be like that. There should be rules that kind of require people at the centre to treat all regions and the nations of the UK equally and fairly. And that then leads us to say that second reform, alongside a written constitution, is that there should be a British basic law. So in the German constitution, there is a basic law that requires equivalent living standards between all the 16 Länder of Germany. Can you imagine if in the post-war period, Britain had introduced a similar basic law, or a British basic law requiring equivalent living standards between all parts of the UK? If that had been the case, I would be talking to you now from a city that would have an underground system, as pretty much every other second city in Europe has. The public realm of the north of England would be markedly different, so would its industry. And yet we haven't had that. And I think, the notion of levelling up can't be just left as a slogan that dies. You have to, in my view, make this the rules by which the country runs, i.e. everywhere deserves an equivalent standard of living, people in all parts of the country. So there we have two reforms: written constitution, British basic law. You then have to go into significant reform of our parliamentary and political system. I am a convert to proportional representation. I believe that until we get to a point where every vote counts equally, every person in every place won't count equally. And I believe moving to a system of proportional representation is essential. I further believe that would change the way the Commons works. It would change the way politics is transacted, with a less of an emphasis on point scoring and the sort of adversarial nature of our politics. And I personally would remove the parliamentary whip, because in my view, that often disempowers Parliament. It means the governing party often rubber stamps the views of the unelected state, and it is a contributory factor to some of the long unresolved issues that we've got in this country, those injustices, but also a housing crisis that has been talked about for decades, but just seemingly just gets worse and worse every year. I would like our elected representatives to have more independence, more freedom, able to use their judgment. And I think we'd have a parliament that would make better decisions and would hold the unelected state better to account. Of course, we need a Senate of the nations and regions to represent all people and places equally. An elected second chamber, that's a given for me. And then beyond, we need to rebalance the legal system, placing a duty of candour on all public servants to tell the truth at the first opportunity, the so-called Hillsborough Law. Steve and I are delighted that the new government have committed to that in the first King's Speech. I've talked about a Grenfell Law. If we're really to make this a more equal country, we have to start talking about housing as a human right enshrined in UK law, that all citizens have a right to a good, safe home. If every person in the UK had that foundation, that, in my view, is an essential building block of a more equal Britain. I furthermore believe we need to rebalance the education system. we've all lived in a country where there's been a snobbery about technical education, and the university route has dominated the English education system for all of my life, and I'm sure most of your lives in the room as well. We need parity between academic and technical education so that we have an education system that is built for equality, so that everyone comes through secondary school and beyond having a path in life and a sense of equal worth. These are my thoughts about how you build a more equal country. There's more I could say, and I won't talk for too long on a Friday evening, because I'm sure you've had a long day. But I was asked to be provocative. I hope there's something provocative in all of that. I'm actually encouraged that the new government is in its early days talking about an English devolution bill, because I also think massive transfer of power out of Whitehall and Westminster and into the regions and nations is also a prerequisite of a more equal country. I'm encouraged by what they've said around a Hillsborough law. Reform of the Lords is starting, so there's real positive signs. But if we're to make this country much more equal than it currently is, and therefore more contented than it currently is, then I think the reforms have to be much more substantial to get to that place. But I will pause there, and I will hand back to the chair, but look forward to hearing your reactions and your questions. Thanks very much for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much. And it is indeed radical and compelling vision you've set out. We've got lots of people here today who are really enthusiastic to be champions of change and to make a difference. But there's obviously a long way between where we are now and the sort of final vision you talk out. Do you have views on what you would encourage people to think of as what are the first steps? What can people do to kind of push this journey on its way?
Well, I think we have some first steps, the ones that I just mentioned that the new government has committed to. And to be fair, in the interest of balance, I think certainly George Osborne can take a considerable degree of credit for having established English devolution, where previous attempts had failed. I think the model he brought forward, he created my role. I think we've come into these roles now and hopefully established that. And the notion now of, obviously 10 or so mayors across the country in the big city regions, a commitment to take devolution everywhere in England. That English devolution bill actually it represents, I think, something that people in my city region have long campaigned for, which is a tilting of the British state away from Whitehall and Westminster and towards the rest of the country. And I think that's let's not underplay that. That is a really significant thing. I'm just preparing our spending bid to the government for the budget coming on the 30th of October. We're signing it off today. It's going in on Tuesday. And we're now getting ready for we're asking for a much deeper round of devolution. For instance, devolution of the DWP employment support budget. In my view, if you localize more of these things that have been done in a top-down fashion from Whitehall silos that haven't actually helped people in the real world, the more you kind of root things through a bottom-up approach through English devolution, I think more positive social change will come from that. But we need the people in that room, if you like, to help us with all of that, to make sure that we are bold, but at the same time we succeed. Because I think what has been created with English devolution is something of a bridgehead to a better way of running the country. But we're not so arrogant as to say here that we've got all of the answers. We will need your help to make sure that we can make the most of the opportunities coming our way. So there's loads to work with, but I think we do need to make the case for that substantial political reform, because until Parliament, in my view, is set up to represent all people and places equally, I think we're forever going to be struggling with a sort of a political climate that has only got more difficult for the 20 plus years that I've been in frontline politics. The alienation from politics is getting worse. So the kind of permission to drive some of this change is sort of, is not where it needs to be. And we really need to make sure the public are giving full legitimacy to this as well. So reform of the political system needs to be something for those who believe in it, that has to be sort of argued for and won. And that's a battle that is got to be ongoing.
Thank you. I'll restrain myself to one more question and then open it up to the floor. You mentioned about the number of mayors now being so many more, and you've written your book with Steve, and you've done podcasts with the former West Midlands Mayor Andy Street. How have you found the balance between collaborating together to kind of be more than the sum of your parts versus being in a bit of competition with each other? And how do you make the most of that dynamic?
It's interesting, that's a really good question. And when we came into these roles, Steve and I had made a commitment to collaborate, which is actually a fairly big deal if you think about it. Liverpool and Manchester standing side by side and agreeing to work with each other. And as the Liverpool-born mayor of Greater Manchester, that carried some political risks for me to do that. But truthfully, the public has responded really, really well to it. They like to see that, most people don't see the world through football rivalries, and the public of the Northwest have liked the idea that Steve and I have worked together to give the Northwest a stronger voice. The truth is, UK mayors, chaired by Tracy Brabin, the mayor of West Yorkshire, is much more collaborative than it's competitive, and that's actually true across the political parties as well. People may have picked up that I had a good friendship with Andy Street in the last mayoral term. We got on really well, and this is true when I meet mayors around the world. We're all grappling with similar issues. We're all trying to solve the same things. And actually what it leads to is a sort of much more collaborative approach, a sharing approach amongst all of us. Steve and I had the privilege of being introduced to Michael Bloomberg's City Leadership Programme when we got elected. And that opened us up to a kind of huge network of people around the world. And you wouldn't believe actually the levels of collaboration that go on in those networks. And it's great that English and British cities are finally in those spaces because of the devolution that we now have. So the emphasis is more on collaboration than competition. Of course, occasionally there'll be an investment that's coming along that we have to put our best foot forward for, and we have to make our case for. So there's a degree of competition at times, but we prefer it much that the government doesn't put us into those bidding wars. And that's the message that's come from all of the mayors back to Whitehall. Don't make us do that. Don't make us all say, we're the best and that place is rubbish. And, it's a waste of everyone's energy, because if there's, it can only be one winner and 9 are going to waste a lot of energy. We really play it back to the government. We prefer not to do that. And what you're beginning to see now is the emergence of more formal cooperation between the combined authorities of England. So my own combined authority, Greater Manchester, is on the verge of signing a collaboration partnership with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough combined authority, because we've got things that we can help each other with. So from our point of view, I'm the first mayor to put buses back under public control in England. And I think there's an aspiration to go in a similar direction in Cambridge. Well, of course, I want my team who've done that to help them. And, they're helping other places that want to do the same as well. So we collaborate on that level. But from a Cambridge point of view, I know I'm speaking to an audience in Oxford here, but I know Oxford University has wonderful spin-outs as well. Cambridge obviously has planning pressures, as does Oxford. So when it comes to R&D, the R is, natural, but the D becomes harder, because how do you build out and spin out some of these amazing ideas that come out of the university? Well, we're saying to them, well, we can do the D. We've got that land. We can build out those enterprises. You can keep a stake in them, but that will then sort of help us all. And therefore the golden triangle, to use that phrase, starts leveling up the north as well, because irrespective of Whitehall, we start helping each other where we've got complementary things that we can bring. So I hope that answers the question. And I think just one last point on it. The collaboration comes from a really important thing. I said before, the Commons is adversarial. That's how it's built. And it operates on a party-first principle. When we left, Steve and I took a solemn vow to take a place first rather than a party first approach. If you're to be a good mayor, I think you have to work on a place first approach. Be more practical about things, less political. and just speak to the place, work with anybody who's prepared to help the place. And we've tried to stay true all the way to that philosophy. And when you work on a place first, it's amazing. That's something that immediately establishes common ground that helps a better politics come in. Because if you're going place first, however people vote, everyone will say, well, we care about the place. And you create a space where everyone can collaborate and kind of work together. If you always take a party first approach, as Westminster does, well, you don't create the common ground, and you don't create that space where people of slightly different views might just come together and work together. So this is why I think English devolution genuinely is adding something new to the political culture of Britain, and why I think the mayors, find it easy to collaborate, because we're all taking that place first approach, whichever party we belong to.
And a huge theme of the conference here has been that collaboration and space for learning from each other within and across places. So it's really energizing to hear you say all of that. I'll take a couple of questions from the room for the mayor. The lady here and the gentleman in the middle.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much, Andy. It's wonderful to hear. I know that GMCA has really been a pioneer in creating more holistic and relational services, and including the use of social outcomes partnerships, which is something that's been another sort of theme of this conference. Yep. And so I'd really value your insights into, firstly, what needs to change so that you and other leaders across the country are going to be able to work in a more outcomes focused and holistic kind of place-based way. And secondly, whether you think that sort of combined authorities as a size of structure of government are better placed than either central government or local authorities to work in that much more effective and place-based way, and if so, why? Thank you.
Well, thank you. No, brilliant. Two brilliant questions there. So actually, it's really relevant to what I was saying, the first question around the spending proposal that we've just signed off today with our 10 leaders, and we're sending to the government on Tuesday. Because what we're moving to, and this was agreed with the last government actually, but we're now moving towards this with the current one, is what was called a single settlement, integrated settlement. So we're moving to a funding arrangement with Whitehall that will be more akin to Wales or Scotland, so more of a block of funding. And as part of our bid, we are obviously saying to the government, the more you route through this single settlement, the more elements of public spending that come through it, the more it makes sense. So if DWP employment support comes through it, we can link that then with the adult education budget and social prescribing, and make it a much more whole person approach to supporting people back to work. Or I'm building an integrated transport system here, so put more of the rail, the rail budgets through our system as well. That then creates the conditions, I think, for very different public services in a place like Greater Manchester, much more preventative, much more holistic, because you never can get that, if I'm honest, from the Whitehall silos. And, I've been in that system. You try and make it work, but the bottom line is, people are looking at only part of the person's issues in a current Job Centre Plus or in, a different part of public services. You can't join it all up together and build from the bottom up, whereas we will be able to, we hope, with our new single settlement. And our aim is to kind of move away, if you like, from old school, let's just use the DWP example, top down, computer says no, distrustful deficit model that seemingly is more about tripping people up rather than helping people out. We would want to come at it completely the other way and say, no, you work with people in a more localized, personalized way. You think about what strengths they've got. You support them on a journey towards work. We actually have evidence from here that gets more people into work rather than the sort of traditional, the traditional model that we're all very familiar with. And then on the second question, why combined authorities, and do they work, and are they the right vehicle? I really think they are. From a political point of view, I think the public can be more persuaded, because the GMCA is the 10 councils of Greater Manchester. So you're building up from what is already there. We're not a new layer as such, really, because the GLA, by contrast, was a layer that was put on top of the councils. The 10 members of the GMCA are my council leaders. And the beauty of the devolution that is coming around the rest of England through combined authorities is, if with that single settlement, if you think about it this way, if we agree on a direction of travel, myself and the 10 council leaders, then the whole of the GM system, lock, stock and barrel, will move in that direction. And then you can move the dial, I think, in terms of public outcomes. I think that's very difficult in still a system that's more fragmented and has different layers. Whereas our system, I think, is quite lean, and it can be quite unified, really, from top to bottom in terms of the directions that we want to take. So I would say that the combined authority model is a really good model. The thing we're trying to crack in the period we're going into is, can working as a combined authority also take pressure off our individual local authorities in terms of the funding pressures that they face? I.e., can we do things with our single settlement that will reduce the budget pressures in our 10 districts? And I think we can show that in the coming period. So hope that answers the question. It's I would say this, but I think our model is superior to London. I think the model that was introduced there, in some ways, doesn't get the same level of join up that we've got. And if we go into this single settlement where we get even more rooted through a very unified, coherent, cohesive model, then I think public service reform is going to go to levels never seen before in this country.
You've given us a lot to watch out for over the next few months as the spending review takes place. I think we have a question in the middle here, and then I might come to one online.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for all that. I have a real soft spot for Greater Manchester. I finished my education, although it doesn't sound like it, in Bury, and loved my 4 years there. Found a wife there as well as everything else. But you mentioned Grenfell, and you mentioned the north-south divide. Grenfell, of course, is in one of the richest London boroughs. Listening to the survivors over the last few days, many of them are first or second generation migrants. I work for the Wembley Community Outreach Centre, and just earlier in the year, we had a fire in a block of housing association flats, and again, many of the residents were first or second generation migrants. I recall when I was a child, living in Scotland, that many of my relatives lived in local authority housing. That housing was desirable. It was among the best housing stock in Edinburgh and in Berwickshire, where my relatives lived. How do we get back to the kind of quality of housing, local authority housing, that we had in the 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s?
Yeah.
Just pause on that for a second, and I'll take a second question. Ian, do you want to add yours?
Hi, Andy. Thanks for your insights. It's really useful. So I'm from the Productivity Institute at the University of Manchester. And you mentioned the need for English devolution. Of course, Manchester is the vanguard of English devolution. And I'm wondering now, you mentioned the coalition government as well, and we've got a bit of perspective now on one of their initiatives, city deals. And I'm wondering if you've got any opinions on how city deals, how effective they were, if you've got any views on that, because of course it was rolled out to cities across the country, and importantly, what we can learn from those for going forward with devolution.
Thank you. Social housing and city deals.
Yes. Well, just to address the first part of the first question, I absolutely, as well as those big regional inequalities, obviously there are inequalities within communities, and no more so, as we've seen with horrifying effect in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. I talk about this in the book with Steve. The pandemic really brings this over to me, that there's so many people living parallel lives, even within communities. In the pandemic, there were people who never stopped working, who were in warehouses where they weren't particularly safe because the rules around social distancing weren't properly enforced, and they weren't getting support if they needed to self-isolate. So did many of them do that? I don't know. And all of that was going on while other people were sitting in their garden, sipping cocktails, doing Zoom quizzes. And, Britain is two worlds, isn't it? I think it is. It's two worlds sometimes spatially, one region compared to another, but it even can happen right within one community, and certainly does in that borough, but, in other parts of the country as well. And that then leads to that sort of the otherness, the sort of, oh, well, that building's going to need to be cladded because it's a bit of an eyesore, or whatever was some of the conversations that were going on around that. So, yeah, we really need to reflect on all of this. And I was encouraged by the Prime Minister's response to the report. To answer the question, to me, I'm going to sound like an old socialist here, aren't I? But I'm going to go back to Nye Bevan's speech on housing in 1948, second reading of the Housing Bill. And I'll paraphrase because I haven't got his exact words in front of me. But he said something to the effect of, we can't any longer view housing as a commodity to be bought and sold, but rather need to see it as a service that needs to be universal to all. And I think we often have to reflect on the wisdom of Nye Bevan, in my view, and go back to that, because you can't achieve what you want for all residents. And we've seen this with the deregulation of transport as well. You cannot get what everyone needs with a basic service through a mantra that says the market will fix it and will deregulate it, and that will make it the market go even more. And it just doesn't. It really does not work. And we can't continue to view housing as something where, you might be lucky to have one and be able to sort of sell it and buy another one, but you can't then just say, well, other people can't, and therefore, there's nothing we can do about that. You've got to, in my view, start to sort of have a paradigm shift in the way we think about housing and go back to it as a sort of essential service that everybody needs, a housing first philosophy. People can't have a good life without a good home. You can't have good health without a good home. Your kids can't have a good education without a good home. And in fact, as a country, I think we spend billions on crisis interventions for people because they don't have a good home. So it's not actually a good use of public money either, not to sort out people's housing properly. So the answer to the question is a Grenfell law, as I call it. Having a new law that says a good, safe home is the basic right of every single person living and resident in the United Kingdom. And I think if you had such a law, I think the savings you would get in other public services would more than pay for the homes that you've built to make that a reality. And it means we've got to stop selling off more homes than we're building, which is still happening. The grip of the housing crisis gets tighter every year. We're still net losing social homes in Greater Manchester every year. It's why I'm really encouraged this week that the Deputy Prime Minister has listened to something I said after the mayoral election and others, that we need to suspend the right to buy from new build social homes or council homes. And I'm really glad that a consultation has now started on that. That, again, is a first step towards a complete sea change to the way this country has been thinking about housing. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I think a Grenfell law absolutely is what we need, and it would bring so many economic and social benefits to the country in ways that I don't think we can fully imagine, but they would be huge. Thank you for a great question. On the second question on city deals, well, I think they were successful. They were enablers, weren't they, for the deeper devolution that's now coming through. And I think the importance of them was that they were the kind of forerunners of the combined authorities. Devolution works, I think, when you think about it in terms of a functional economy. The travel to work area, the functional economy of the city and the city region, because that's the coherent building block, I think. Going back to when I was in government, we had plans for regional devolution. And while I was a big supporter of it at the time, in some ways it was good that it went down in the northeast, because that would have been a remote extra layer. I don't think it would have had the power of the devolution that's coming through now. So I think city deals work to the extent that they laid the ground for what has come forward since. And I do make this point to colleagues in Scotland, where they also had city deals. I've observed, though, that there's a risk here that, with the way devolution has gone in Scotland, that the city regions have been disempowered and more power has been hoovered up to the central level. and the city deals have not stopped that. And I personally believe that, you know, imagine this, if we had a level of devolution everywhere, if we had an elected provost or mayor of Greater Glasgow and Edinburgh, Dundee, Belfast, Dublin, who are looking at this, the UK would function in a different way. I think the mayors would make it a more practical place where we're just collaborating with each other. We'd be ringing if there was an elected mayor of Glasgow, I'd be ringing that person, you know, a couple of times a month, you know, to sort of to collaborate. And, you know, I really think you've got to kind of go with the logic of this, and you end up with a more practical approach to the way of running things than a political approach that's always with the lens of Westminster or Holyrood. Let the places, let the cities just collaborate with each other. So city deals were a good thing as far as they went, I would say, but you've got to go with the logic of them and keep deepening them, and that's what Greater Manchester has been doing. You would then say to me as academics all in that room, okay, but what's the proof? You know, where is your proof for what you are saying? Well, my proof is that Greater Manchester, our economy has been growing faster than the UK economy for a significant number of years now and is predicted to continue to do so. And secondly, in recent times, our productivity has risen 3 times faster than Greater London. And in my lifetime, that is not something that we've been able to say for the majority of my life, but it has become true in the last 10 or 15 years. And in those statistics, I think you have the evidence that city deals helped start this journey, but in and of themselves, they weren't enough.
Thank you. Is there a question from online?
Yes, there is.
And maybe we take one more from the room as well after that, if people want to show their hands.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. So we've had a question submitted by one of our incoming Masters of Public Policy students starting this September. So she says Manchester's population has grown from 400,000 in 2000 to nearly 600,000 today. Manchester is also predicted to outpace UK economic growth between 2024 and 2027. Clearly someone who's done their research. These figures were published before a new Labour government was elected. How do you see the Greater Manchester Combined Authority continuing to drive this growth? And what new possibilities do you think are achievable moving forward? Thank you.
Great. And then we have one more in the room up here.
Hi. So it's really great to hear that you're a convert to proportional representation, and I look forward to seeing you push for that in the wider Labour Party. But many of us here are civil servants, we're bureaucrats, and so political reform is not something that's within our gift. But we're all very committed to social outcomes wherever they are, hence still being here at 6:30 on a Friday afternoon talking about that. So I just wondered, what is your recommendation about how we get better collaboration between regions and Whitehall, which are focused on social outcomes? Because I think there's a risk that there can be a lot of distraction about structures and machinery of government. And actually, most of us here just want to focus on outcomes and collaborating for that. So yeah, what's your recommendation? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. And thank you to the soon to arrive master's student, because you've allowed me to breathe a sigh of relief that the evidence I just quoted in this esteemed gathering actually is true, which is a rarity, isn't it, for a politician, having made a claim about Greater Manchester projected to grow faster than the UK economy 24 to 27. Well, I'm glad you backed me up on that, so thank you for that. You're clearly going to go far when you arrive at your new posting. So how do we keep this success story building? It is about solving the housing crisis. I think we're succeeding at the moment because, you know, we have been unbalanced as a country, haven't we? We've had if we're honest, a London and southeastern part of the country that has overheated and has become harder for, particularly for graduates in their 20s and 30s to live. So I think part of our success at the moment is that people now see Manchester as viable in terms of the level of graduate careers opportunities that we've got, but also in terms of a standard of living in you mentioned the numbers of people living in city centre Manchester. Well, people in their 20s can afford to live still just about in city centre Manchester, although that is beginning to change a bit. As all cities go on a journey, they can become a victim of their success, and we're watchful of that. So we are pitching in this spending review that I mentioned, spending bid that I mentioned before, for more ability to build a truly affordable council and social housing. We absolutely need to ensure that people can still afford to live here. We believe that a big risk to growth may be the inability of investors to see that they can get the talent that they need. And hence, we believe there needs to be a substantial reform of the education system along the lines that I spoke about before, where we are bringing through an equal technical route to support the very successful university route. 2/3 of young people in Greater Manchester don't go on the traditional university route, and we believe they are not sufficiently supported through that journey into a clear path beyond school and then into the economy. And they are people who've got a huge amount to contribute. The reality of where Greater Manchester is right now, for those who know it and those who've been recently, you will have seen the skyscrapers on our skyline, and that's been quite a dramatic change in recent times. The truth of the matter is, if you are growing up in one of our 10 boroughs, many of those kids can see the skyscrapers from their bedroom window, but they cannot see a path well, they don't know what goes on inside them, number one. And secondly, they can't see a path for them as to how they may go towards them and work within them. And this is what we're setting out to solve, because if we can develop a compelling, integrated technical education system that gives a high degree of confidence to potential investors, then I think our success story will continue to grow. If we don't face up now to that issue, and we see the vacancy rate, which we've already got actually in our digital and tech sector, if that continues to grow and becomes reputational, then this kind of early growth success story could start to falter. And we've got to be very watchful of that, as well as all the time, building out a London-style public transport system. So, we will complete the re-regulation of buses in Greater Manchester on the 5th of January next year. We are then going to bring rail into the B network. So we're going to have a fully integrated system, tap in, tap out with a daily cap over bike, bus, tram and train. And we think that as well will, if I'm going to be a bit of a competitive mayor for one moment, that will give people more reason to choose Manchester to invest than perhaps other parts of the UK, because we'll be the place outside of London with by far the best integrated low-cost public transport system. And that's part of our mission as well. So to me, these are the enablers of growth: housing, transport, and of course then talent, and supporting talent to keep the success story growing. So I hope that answers the question. It's about fixing the fundamentals, the essential enablers of a more productive economy, and we are absolutely on a mission to do that. In terms of the second question, thank you for your, I will, and I do go out there and make the case for PR, and will absolutely continue to do so within Labour circles. I think maybe not in this Parliament, but I think its time is coming. So I don't think it's healthy that even though it's on the other side of politics to me, but to have millions of people voting for a particular party and you only get sort of 4 or 5 seats, that would be true perhaps of the Green Party as well. The system, I think people are getting frustrated with the political system, and we need to wake up to that, and I'll continue to make that argument. But your broader point was, not getting too structural about things and starting to, think about, a place-based approach, a person-centered approach. That's what matters. But that's what Westminster and Whitehall can't do, because they're not structured to do that. But what we observe now is they are beginning to understand the power of devolution, where it's a bottom-up endeavor, where you can sort of take a person-centered or a place-based approach. You can join the dots between health and housing and transport and skills and all of those things, and you make a coherent you make a coherent whole out of all of that. And we've got real evidence in Greater Manchester now that works in a way that the kind of silo-based delivery never will. But it's really interesting. We had the second permanent secretary of the Treasury visit us today, Beth Russell, and we had a really good conversation about all of this. And I actually detect something of a sea change in Whitehall now, where they are increasingly seeing that, yeah, there's a real opportunity here. We had to prove ourselves first as the kind of forerunners of English devolution, that we could create something that was a trusted vehicle, that we could actually be trusted to deliver. I think we've got to that stage now. And I think, it's not all about us pointing fingers at Whitehall. Some of it was on us to show we could do it, show we could deliver. I think we've done that in Greater Manchester. So now I think we've created something that they can now come in and work with us on in a much less sort of, I don't know, divisive sort of transactional way, where we're more together solving common problems. The new government has set a target of growth, the fastest in the G7. That only comes, I think, when you do start to sort of work in a place-based way. And the other target they've set of 80% of people into work. Well, again, that doesn't come from doing what we're currently doing. It comes from doing something very, very different and supporting people in really different ways in that journey towards work. So I feel that penny has dropped finally in Whitehall. I actually feel really encouraged about it. I'm going into this spending review in a really hopeful, optimistic mood. We'll have to see where it ends up. But the big pitch I'm making actually is that to all of the Whitehall departments, we can deliver your bit of the mission that the government has set for you more effectively and quickly than if you were to do it through the old traditional way on your own. And I think people are buying into that now.
Thank you so much. We have questions enough. We could go on for hours, I'm sure, but you've already been incredibly generous with your time, and I'm conscious it's Friday evening. So you certainly fulfilled the brief to be provoking, but you have also been practical, inspirational, and given us a great deal of hope as well as things to think about. So please join me in thanking Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Thank
you very much. You're very kind. Thank you. And thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good weekend.
And that wraps up Social Outcomes 2024. Again, for those of you who are here in person and are able to, please do join us for a drink and the celebratory gala. I'm sure you will have lots and lots to talk about following that. Thank you. Thank you.